The faint blue glow of the laptop screen spilled across the kitchen counter as Clara stood rinsing dinner plates under running tap water. Rain streaked the backyard windows, the steady gray drizzle typical of Pacific Northwest autumn, drumming soft against glass. She had just finished loading most of the dinnerware into the dishwasher when she heard Ethan's footsteps behind her, slow and heavy, the tired gait of a man fresh home from a long shift in the ER. He did not drop his medical bag by the front hall like he usually did. Instead, he stood in the archway leading into the kitchen, laptop balanced in one hand, his jaw set tight. Clara shut off the faucet, drying her hands on a cotton dish towel. She could read the tension in his shoulders before he even spoke. 12 years of marriage had taught her every small tell, the slight furrow between his brows, the way his voice dropped lower when something unsettled him. She knew exactly what email he must have opened. The calendar reminder for her outpatient surgery had slipped into her work email inbox earlier that week, and she had forgotten to delete it from the shared household laptop they both used. "So you're having surgery," Ethan said flatly. It was not a question. He stepped further into the kitchen, setting the laptop down on the granite countertop between them. The screen still lit, showing the appointment confirmation. "You scheduled a surgical procedure, and you never said one single word to me about it." Clara folded the dish towel and laid it over the edge of the sink. She felt that familiar quiet weight settle in her chest, the same dull pressure that had built slowly over months. It had started small at first. A work-approved out-of-state business trip her manager had assigned her back in August. She had reviewed the travel forms, signed off on them, and booked her flights without bringing it up over dinner. She had known Ethan would offer to run through every travel risk, vet the hotel safety, push for her to adjust her schedule to fit around his rotating hospital shift. She had just wanted to make her own call for. Then her best friend Mia's wedding invitation had arrived, a formal request for +1 attendance for every guest. Clara had looked at the and realized it landed on one of Ethan's mandatory weekend ER rotations. Instead of pressing him to trade shifts or complaining about the con, she had bought an expensive ceramic serving set as a wedding gift and driven to the ceremony alone. She had danced, laughed, and come home late that, and Ethan had barely even asked how the day. It had felt easier not to bring it up. Now this surgery. Her primary care doctor had flagged the minor abdominal issue during a routine checkup. It was elective, low risk, but it could not wait indefinitely. Clara had gone through the whole process: lab work, pre-op consultations, insurance approvals, and locked in the operating date all on. Some part of her had hoped she could handle it from start to finish without it becoming Ethan's project. "I didn't keep it from you," Clara said, keeping her tone even. "I went through all the thing. My doctor walked me through every risk. It's straightforward outpatient." Ethan's expression hardened, the clinical doctor reflex clicking into place the way it did when he assessed patients in the emergency room. His training kicked in before his husband's heart. He leaned forward, tapping one finger against the glowing lap. "Straightforward surgery still carries risk," he said, his voice sharp with frustration. "You can't just book something like this out in air. Why didn't you come talk to me? Give me your medical records. I want to look over your lab results. Speak to surgeon. Arrange post-op care at the house. I can coordinate everything for you." Something inside Clara pulled back. That was exactly what she had been trained. It always unfolded this way. Whenever a health concern popped up, Ethan stepped out of his role as her partner and slipped into the mindset of a. He would take charge, reorganize plans, rewrite schedules, and make every major decision while she sat on the sidelines. Her preferences would get buried under his medicine. "This is me, Ethan," she told him, taking a step backward. "I respect your medical background, but this is my care plan. I have my own doctor. I have read every report. I am capable of major." "Capable is not the point," he shot back. "We are married. Major medical choices are supposed to be shared choices. You signed off on a work trip without discussion. You went to the wedding by yourself. Now surgery? It feels like you are shutting me completely your life." Rain continued tapping against the windows. The dishwasher hummed in the background. The comfortable, unspoken routine of their marriage had cracked wide open the kitchen. For years they had swept small alignments under the rug. Now those issues. Ethan stared at her, and wounded. In his mind, he was offering care and protection. To Clara, it felt like another attempt to take her agency away. Neither of them could see the other's moment. "Not shutting you out," Clara replied, but there was no warmth in her words. "I am just tired of every important decision I make getting filtered through your medical." Ethan fell silent, running one hand through dark hair. He looked exhausted, caught between his instinct to fix the problem and the sharp realization that his wife was pulling further away from him, and he had to stop it. The quiet distance that had grown between them over months was no longer a secret. It sat heavy in the room, impossible to ignore. The hum of the dishwasher faded into a low mechanical whir as Ethan pushed away from the counter. He dragged one hand down his face, the weight of 12-hour ER shifts still clinging to his bones. Rain kept lashing against the windows, turning the backyard into a blurred sheet of gray. Neither of them moved toward the dining table or the living room. The fight had rooted them in the kitchen, the place where they usually laughed over weekend coffee and talked through ordinary days. Now every word hung sharp in the damp autumn air. "I don't understand what you want from me," Ethan said, his voice softer, but still tight with frustration. "When something is wrong with your health, my first instinct is to protect you. That is not some power grab. That is how I love people. I see a risk. I want to minimize it." Clara leaned her hip against the sink, crossing her arms loosely over her chest. She had rehearsed pieces of this conversation inside her head for months, yet speaking it out loud still felt heavy. It was never one single moment that had pushed her to stop sharing every detail. It was a slow accumulation of small defeats. "Do you remember last spring when I had that bad migraine episode?" she asked. "I told you I just needed quiet and a dark room. You brought home 3 different prescription options, called 2 of your hospital colleagues to get second opinion, rearranged my work calendar without asking, and told my manager I should take 3 unplanned sick days. I never got to say what I actually needed." Ethan blinked, taken aback. To him that night had been an act of devotion. He had watched her suffer through blinding headache and done everything his training taught him to ease her distress. It had never crossed his mind that his help could feel suffocating. "That was it," he argued. "You could barely stand. I was scared you might have something neurological going." "I was scared," Clara answered, "but I also got zero say in my own. You treated me like a patient, not your wife." That pattern kept repeating. So little, I stopped bringing things up. The business trip, the wedding, this surgery. I got tired of having my experiences reevaluated through your doctor lens before you even hear how. A bitter silence fell between them. Ethan paced a short circle across the floor. His scrub-clad shoes squeaked. He tried to process what he was saying, but hurt kept getting in the way. All he could fixate on was the fact that his wife had kept major parts of her life hidden. It stung far deeper than he wanted. "So every time I try to look out for you, I'm stepping. If I had known you were going under the knife, I would have cleared. I would have been there for pre-appointments, for when you wake up post-procedure. Instead, I find out from a stray calendar alert on our shop." Clara's shoulders slumped. She could hear the genuine pain beneath his frustration, and part of me. She had never wounded him. She just wanted space to make her own choices without him. "I didn't plan for you to out this way," she admitted. "I thought I would tell you the date, but every time I tried to bring it up, I pictured how this conversation would go. I pictured you requesting records, my surgeon, rewriting our household plans." Before Ethan could reply, her phone buzzed on the counter. It was Mia, her best friend, sending a quick text checking in. Clara glanced down at the screen, and Ethan noticed the name flash. "Mia knew?" he asked, tightening again. "You told her about not me?" "Mia is my friend." She listened. "She didn't offer to rewrite my care plan," Clara replied. "That does not mean I wanted to give her." Ethan shook his head and walked out of the care word. She heard his footsteps go down the hallway bedroom. A few minutes later, the bedroom door clicked shut, not slammed, but closed firmly enough to make it. Clara stayed alone in the kitchen, the rain. She shut down the shared laptop, the Glove countertop. The dishwasher finished its cycle with a soft click. The house felt large, too quiet. She had argument on paper. She had voiced her truth. It had not brought relief. It had only left a raw. Later that night, she wandered down to the guest covers. She could not bring herself to her bedroom door. Sleeping apart had between them before. There had been fights, tense evenings, hard conversations, but never in their own home. This was new territory. She texted Mia back, typing out a short summary unfolded. Mia wrote back quickly, sympathetic but cautious, pointing out that Ethan's fear came from love, fear was wrong. Easy fix existed. Clara set her phone on the nightstand to the dark ceiling. She had stood up for her bodily autonomy, already visible. The easy, uncomplicated marriage was gone. There was no going pretending nothing was wrong. Tomorrow they would have to face each other, and neither of them knew when would land next. Morning light filtered gray through the heavy rain curtains, casting dim light across the guest room bed where Clara had spent the night. She woke stiff, her neck sore from the unfamiliar pillow, and lay listening for sounds from the rest of the house. No clink of coffee mugs, no water running in the master bathroom. When she finally stepped out into the hallway, the The master bedroom door stood open, and the room was empty. Ethan's medical bag was gone from its usual hook by the front entry. He had left for the hospital before sunrise, slipping out without waking her. Clara wandered into the kitchen and brewed a pot of coffee. The counter still held faint traces of last night's fight, the closed laptop, a half-empty glass of water. She sipped her coffee slowly, thinking through what came next. The surgery date was 3 weeks away. She could not keep living in this fractured limbo. She needed to draw clear lines, not just blow off steam in one heated kitchen argument. Her phone pinged with a reminder from her surgeon's office, confirming her pre-op lab work scheduled for later that week. Reading the message strengthened her resolve. This was her medical path, and she would not hand control of it over. Still, a quiet part of her worried that holding firm would destroy what remained of their marriage. Mid-morning, Ethan sent her a short text from the hospital. It was not an apology, nor a truce. I spoke with a colleague in the surgical ward. I'm trying to pull your chart. Clara's stomach dropped. She understood exactly what he was attempting. Using his hospital credentials to bypass her direct consent, hoping to get access to her test results and surgical notes. She typed back quickly, "You can't do that. HIPAA protects my medical records. My care team will not release anything to you without my signed authorization." Minutes passed before his reply. "I'm your friend. I should have access to information that could affect your..." Clara set her phone down on the table, her hands growing. Legally, Washington state gave him no automatic right to her private medical files. Marriage did not override patient privacy. Ethan knew this fact intimately, but fear was overriding his professional. For an ER doctor trained to intervene when danger appeared, being locked out of his spouse's health information felt like power. She called Mia a short time, putting the phone on speaker while she folded laundry in the living room. Rain continued tapping steadily against. "He genuinely thinks he's doing the response," Mia said the line. "His whole job is stepping into crises in them. When he can't fix yours, it throws him completely off kilter. That doesn't make it okay, though. Your body, call. But what if I'm too rigid?" Clara voiced the fear she rarely allowed. "Marriage is supposed to mean sharing major life events. Am I punishing him for bad past behavior by shutting him out entirely?" Paused. "There is a difference between shutting someone out and refusing to let them take over. You can let him be supportive without handing him the..." That conversation settled some Clara. She would not surrender authority or surgery, but she also would not lock him out completely. She drafted a calm directive for Ethan, laying out her non-negotiable boundaries. She would share select updates voluntarily, she told him, but she would not surrender her full words. She would decide which details to when. No behind-the-scenes attempts to pull her patient file. When Ethan finished his long shift that evening, he found Clara sitting at the room table, copies of her surgical paperwork spread for her. He read her text message before he even took off his wet rain jacket. His face darkened as he promised. "So this final position," he said, hanging his jacket by the door. "Voluntary updates only. No full transparency. I get whatever you choose to give me." "It is for my autonomy," Clara corrected. "I am not your patient. I am your wife." Those two mixed up. Ethan dragged a chair and sat across from her, elbows resting on the table. He looked worn down, eyes heavy from 14-hour room trauma. Every instinct inside him screamed that he should more information, that he needed every lab value to sleep at night. But he also recognized that pushing harder would pay. He'd agree with her terms, but he knew he could comply. HIPAA rules blocked his hospital system workaround, and pressed rift. "I hate feeling powerless when you're under anesthesia," he admitted quietly. "I hate that I cannot shield you from risk." "I hate you feel powerless," Clara answered. But trying to is not the answer. Silence hung between them. The gap had not closed. But Clara had planted firm boundaries, and Ethan had been forced to accept he could not make choices. It was fragile. Later that night, he headed to the guest room. He did not argue further, but the hurt lingered by that moment. Clara's master bedroom alone. She had secured it for her own surgery. The cost was tangible. Her marriage was now operating on new terms. There was no telling whether these boundaries would mend their partnership or push them toward permanent separation. The days slipped by under a persistent gray Seattle drizzle. 3 weeks remained until Clara's surgery, and the household settled into an uneasy, quiet rhythm. Ethan worked back-to-back ER shifts, leaving before dawn and returning long after dark. They rarely crossed paths in person, most of their communication happening through short clipped text messages about household bills, grocery runs, and limited health updates. The guest room remained Ethan's sleeping space. Neither of them brought up moving back into the master bedroom. Clara threw herself into her marketing project workload to fill the empty space. Her manager, Diane, had loaded her up with a big product launch deadline, and long hours at the office helped quiet the swirling anxiety in her head. When she left work each evening, she would stop at the grocery store or drive over to Mia's house for quick dinners. Being home alone felt heavy, every wall echoing with their unresolved fight. Ethan, meanwhile, carried his frustration into the hospital. At work, every decision was clear-cut. Assess symptoms, order tests, lay out treatment plans, take decisive action. Medicine rewarded control and certainty. But at home, there was no test result to interpret, no prescription he could write to fix their marriage. He kept replaying their kitchen arguments in his head. He could not shake the feeling that Clara's boundaries were just a polite way of pulling away from him entirely. One Thursday evening, Clara got home late. She had stayed overtime finalizing campaign assets, and she dragged herself into the house, exhausted. The front hall light was on. Ethan was home, sitting alone on the living room couch. The television played a muted medical documentary, but he was not watching. He stared down at his phone, his shoulders. When he heard her come in, he looked. "You're home late?" Diane pushed the launch timeline forward, Clara said, setting her work bag down by the... "I had to sign off on creative assets." Ethan nodded, but his expression stayed. "You're always working late these. You barely eat here. You spend most of your free time with. It feels like you are building a whole separate life that I am not." Clara froze. That stung. She was leaning on work and friendship for emotional safety. Yes, but it was a reaction to the tension inside their house, not a premeditated plan. "This isn't me trying to live you," she said, her voice rising slightly. "This is what happens when every conversation we have turns into a battle over my body and my... I don't want to pick fights every... So I'm a problem?" Ethan replied, standing up. "I just want to be husband. Instead, I get partial updates, separate rooms, and you treating our house like a place you only sleep in. I don't even know what you are feeling." Their argument circled the same ground they had covered before. Clara restated her boundaries around medical autonomy. Ethan repeated his fear of her risk. No new ground was gained. They talked in circles until fatigue overwhelmed both, and Ethan retreated once more. A couple days later, Clara met Mia for brunch at a neighborhood cafe, warm steam curling up from their mugs of oat latte. Sun tried to break through cloud cover, thin, pale light filtering through the large... "How's it really going?" Mia asked, tearing off a piece. Clara stirred. "I'm holding my ground on the surgery, but everything else falling apart. I thought setting boundaries would clear the air, and we barely speak. He thinks I'm cheating out of the marriage, and I'm scared he will never understand." Mia's expression shifted, her usual supportive tone softening into this. "I hate seeing you hurt, and I agree you deserve control and health. But I also wonder if you've closed off too much of the rest of your partnership. Boundaries don't have to mean total emotional distance. Have you asked yourself whether you are pushing him away more than you need to?" Words landed hard. Clara had expected unwavering solidarity from a friend. Instead, Mia pointed out a blind spot she considered. Maybe she had begun lumping all of Ethan's care together with his controlling instincts, shutting down even the parts of him that... She left the rift. For the first time, she could own judgment. Was she defending herself? Or was she punishing Ethan for past mistakes? She could no longer tell where reasonable self-protection ended and sabotage began. That night was empty. Ethan had picked up an extra emergency shift, scheduled last minute to cover a coworker's family emergency. Clara wandered from room of their quiet home. The master bedroom, the kitchen, the guest room, and sleeping. Every space held memories of 12 good years with fresh pain. She pulled out her phone, scrolling back text messages. She could trace of their connection. Fewer casual check-ins, fewer weekend plans. She sat on the edge of their shared bed. Loneliness set her chest. She had won the right to manage her own surgery, tasted hollow. She had no allies left on for clear answers. Even Mia saw two sides to the conflict. For the first time since this whole fight began, Clara felt genuinely isolated. She did not know she was fighting to save her marriage, watching it unravel. Clara woke up early on Saturday morning, long before the gray Seattle sun had fully climbed above the treetops. The house was quiet. Ethan had gotten home after 2 o'clock that morning from his extra ER shift, and he had gone straight to the guest room without stopping to speak to her. She lay in the master bedroom bed, staring at the ceiling, turning over Mia's brunch words again and again. Doubt gnawed at her. Maybe she had overcorrected. Maybe she had punished Ethan for old wounds, without ever fully laying out exactly what those wounds were. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through old photos stored in her cloud gallery. One image stopped her. a candid snapshot taken 3 years prior. Clara was sitting in a hospital exam chair, pale and shaken, fresh off a frightening ovarian cyst rupture. That was the health scare neither of them had ever properly unpacked. At the time, severe pain had sent her rushing to the emergency room where Ethan worked. He had stepped in immediately, overridden her quiet wishes, spoken directly to every provider, filled out paperwork, and made every single decision while she lay there overwhelmed and sedated by pain medication. Back then she had been grateful for his strength in the chaos, but buried underneath that gratitude had lingered a sharp, unspoken hurt. No one had asked her what she wanted. Everyone had treated her as the doctor's vulnerable spouse rather than an adult patient with her own preference. That old hurt had never been talked. It had sat dormant, building pressure, until the upcoming elective surgery pried it loose. Clara realized this fight was never only about the upcoming abdominal procedure. The surgery was just the trigger. All the small choices, the business, the solo wedding, the hidden operation, were delayed reactions to that old. She had never told Ethan how deeply that hospital experience had wounded her sense of. He only remembered that he had kept. He had no idea part of that safety had felt like a. She heard the guest room door click open down the. Ethan shuffled out, blear-eyed, wearing faded sweatpants and an old hospital-branded dark circles hung heavy under his eyes, proof of his brutal overnight. He paused in the hallway when he saw Clara standing in the doorway of the master. There was no anger in his face, only bone-deep exhaustion. "Can we sit down and talk?" Clara said flee. "Not argue. I need to tell you something I've never really said." Ethan gave a slow nod. They moved to the kitchen table, where morning light filtered thin through the rain streak. She pulled up that old photo on her phone and slid it across the wooden surface. He glanced at the screen, recognition crossing. "Sure," he said quietly. "I thought we moved it." "We never moved past it," answered. "Back in that ER, I terrified. You stepped in and took care of every thing, and I will always be thankful for that. But Ethan, no one asked me what I wanted. I was in so much pain I could barely form sentences, and every medical call got made over my head. Afterward, you never checked in on how that made me feel. You just were glad that it was over." Ethan's motionless. He leaned in his chair, processing her words. All this time he had viewed that event as one of his greatest acts of care for her. It had never crossed his mind that it had left lasting damage. He had treated the physical emergency and completely missed the aftermath. "That explains so much," he murmured. "All these months, I kept thinking you were pulling away." "I didn't realize that." "Built slowly," Clara told him. "Every time you switched into doctor mode at home, a little piece of that up. So I started making big choices without you, not to get back at you. To prove to myself I still held authority." The weight hanging over the room shifted. For the first time since the fight erupted in weeks ago, they were not debating surgery logistics or arguing over medical records. They were digging up the root cause beneath all recent conflict. But clarity did not end everything. The surgery was now only 10 days away. Old patterns would not vanish with honest conversation. Ethan understood her origin of pain, yet fear for her safety inside him. He still worried about anesthesia risk, complications, all the worst-case scenarios drilled into him by medicine. "I guarded your choices," Ethan said, voice tight. "But I still hate the thought of you going through recovery without me expect." "I hate being kept partially in the," Clara sighed. "I can share more details voluntarily, but I still will not hand over full control. That line still stays." He nodded, but his jaw tightened. The core compromise remained out of reach. Understanding the origin of the hurt did not erase his fear, nor did autonomy. Progress had been made, but danger lingered. The surgery was approaching fast, and they still had no solid plan for through it. Outside, a heavy gray rain filled the neighborhood. The kitchen felt calmer, far from resolved. The truth was finally out in the open, yet neither of them could tell if this new understanding would mend their marriage or merely soften the blow before the next wave crashed over them. The 10-day countdown ticked down in small, sharp increments. Work pressure closed in on Clara from every side. The product launch she had been managing was accelerating, and her boss, Diane, kept piling on last-minute revisions, demanding late-night reviews and weekend check-ins. Meanwhile, Ethan's hospital schedule turned brutal. The emergency department was swamped with seasonal flu cases and accident injuries, locking him into 4 consecutive double shifts. He left before dawn and returned long after midnight, too drained for meaningful conversation, even when their paths briefly crossed. The fragile new understanding they had reached in the kitchen quickly began to fray under exhaustion. They texted brief updates, but there was no time to sit and talk through what they had learned. Clara kept sending over small, voluntary snippets about her pre-op appointments, but Ethan was so overwhelmed by ER chaos he rarely read them fully. He would fire back quick replies rooted in his clinical training, asking for test numbers or risk statistics, and each reply nudged Clara right back into that defensive state she knew so well. One Tuesday evening, Clara dragged herself home from the office, her head throbbing from screen fatigue. She had just received her final pre-op clearance. The surgery was scheduled for early Monday morning, only 5 days away. She sank onto the living room couch and called Mia, hoping for grounding support. Mia picked up, but her tone was harsh. Jake's mother had fallen and fractured her hip, and Mia was swamped coordinating family care. She barely had time to listen, offering only rushed sympathy before she had to hang. For the first time, Clara's closest friend could not show up. Alone in the quiet house, Clara's anxiety spilled. She stared at the surgical paperwork spread across the coffee table, and old fears. What if something went wrong under anesthesia? What if she woke up and there was no one there who truly understood what she did? A dark thought crept. Maybe Ethan was already mentally checking out of their marriage. Maybe all the tension had burned whatever was left between them. That night, Ethan finished his 4th back-to-back. He stumbled through the front door close to 1 a.m., scrub uniform stained and eyes bloodshot. His phone had pinged with Clara's pre-op update hours earlier, but he had been tied up stabilizing a trauma patient and had never gotten around to reading it. When he saw her sitting on the dimly lit couch, he misread her quiet stillness. He assumed she was pulling further away, preparing for life with him. "You haven't said much about me," Ethan said, his voice raw with burnout. "Are you already planning your recovery without me?" Clara, "I sent you an update. I texted you. You never did. I've had 3 mass casualty cases in 48 hours, he snapped. I barely have time to eat. I can't drop everything every time you... Frustration boiled over on both sides. Clara felt abandoned because her updates were... Ethan rejected because he believed she expected him to drop his high-stakes job to tend to every detail. Neither of them stopped to account for the crushing weight each was carrying. The conversation spiraled, sharp words bouncing off the living room walls. At the end, both of them were entertaining the terrible possibility that separation might... Ethan turned and walked to the guest room with another word, closing. Clara stayed on the couch long after, wrapped in a throw blanket, the house wrapped in... All the progress from their Saturday talk felt like it had vanished. Mia was unavailable. Work was draining her, and her marriage hung by a thread. She could not run from the heart any longer. The core problem was not the self. It was the way they kept falling into the same harmful patterns. She stayed up late, thinking through what real partnership really meant to her. It was not that Ethan could never worry or never for advice. It was that he needed to listen first, to treat her as an equal adult before he went into doctor mode. She took his care, but she could not survive being perpetually treated like... That was the non-negotiable truth she had been dancing. No amount of understanding old wounds would fix things if their day-to-day changed. When she finally lay down on her bedroom bed, dark. Every external source of had fallen away, but in the lonely hour, her inner resolve solidified. She would go through with her surgery, and when she was through recovery, she would sit Ethan down and lay out exactly what their marriage needed to survive. If he could not meet her there, then she would have to accept the painful consequences. She would not keep living seen, half-respected. Dawn broke pale and misty over the treetops. 4 days remained until Clara's surgery. She woke early, no longer tangled in the sharp panic of the night before, but steady with quiet resolve. She had spent hours turning over her non-negotiable terms, and she knew she could not wait until after the operation to have this critical conversation. If they walked into surgery and recovery still trapped in their old loops, nothing would truly change. Ethan came out of the guest room shortly after 7. He looked worn thin, his shoulders hunched from days of back-to-back ER trauma. He poured himself a mug of black coffee, leaning against the kitchen counter, expecting another cold, distant morning. Instead, Clara pulled out 2 chairs at the dining table and gestured for him to sit. "I want to talk properly," she said. "No fighting, no doctor mode triage. Just husband and wife." Ethan hesitated, then sat. Steam curled upward from his coffee mug. Rain had paused for the moment, soft gray daylight spilling through the window. "I am still going forward with my surgery," Clara began plainly. "That will not change. But I don't want us to keep living like strangers under the same roof. I don't want this marriage to only survive when there is no crisis to trigger it." She laid out her terms calmly, without anger. First, before offering medical solutions or risk assessments, Ethan needed to ask how she felt and listen fully. He could give advice, but he could not take over her care, call her providers, or try to obtain private records without her signed consent. Boundaries worked both ways. She would make an effort to loop him in early on major life decisions, instead of shutting out and letting resentment. But that openness depended on him respecting her age. Ethan stared across the table. For years, when trouble arose in his life, solving the problem had always been his go-to response. In the ER, you did not sit with feelings. You acted. That instinct had bled into him. He had never learned another way to love. For the first time, he could not reach for a quick fix. There was no result, no medicine, no procedure he could perform to make this conflict disappear. His usual toolbox. So I can care you, but I have to hold myself back from fixing, he said slowly, testing the idea. It feels natural. Every part of my training screams to intervene when harm is. It is not asking you to stop caring, Clara answered. It is asking you to love me as your wife, not. Fear makes you jump straight to solutions. You skip the part where you just show up. Ethan fell silent. He thought back to this rupture, to the episode, to every small fight of the past months. He could now see the path clearly. His urge to protect kept overriding her right to self-termination. He had been so focused on keeping her safe that he had risked. I never meant to make you waste, he said, and for the first time there was genuine remorse, not just defense frustration. I get so scared of losing in the ER. I see terrible outcomes every single shift. When it's you, that fear multiplies. I rush to control everything so I don't have to. Claire's throat tightened. She had waited months to hear acknowledgement. Still, remorse was not in transformation. Old habits would not overnight. I believe, she said. But apologies are only useful if we actually change how we act, he nodded. I can't promise I will never slip back into her instincts. That is deeply ingrained. But I can promise I will catch myself. I will pause before I to fix everything. It was not a perfect resolution. There were no grand promises that everything would go on. But for the first time since the whole conflict ignited, they were negotiated as equal partners. Ethan reached across the table and rested his hands. She did not pull away. The touch was tentative, fragile, distance. I want to be there for surgery and recovery, he told her. On your terms. I won't demand records. I won't call your surgeon behind your back. If you choose to share details with me, I will listen first. Clara exhaled. Some of the heavy weight that had sat on her chest for months began to lift. She was not surrendering over her body, but she was open the door to let him back in. Later that day, Ethan texted his hospital supervisor and swapped one of the coming ER shifts. Free on surgery day. He would not run the show, but he would be present, wait for her at the surgical center, ready to support needed. The power balance had shifted. Ethan could no longer treat their partnership like a medical case to diagnose and resolve. The hard work of unlearning old patterns was just beginning. The surgery loomed only days away, and the real test of their new agreement would arrive the moment they stepped into the chaos of pre-op and recovery. Monday arrived, surgery day. The sky hung overcast, a thin cold drizzle drifting across the Seattle suburbs. Clara woke before her alarm, her stomach knotted with quiet nerves. The pre-op instructions required her to skip all food and drink after midnight. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled on loose, comfortable clothing. Ethan was already up. He had traded his ER rotation, so he had no hospital obligations today. He did not march over with lists of risks or fire off medical questions. He simply made her a warm mug of herbal tea she could not drink, set it on the counter, and kept his distance, reading the tension in her posture. Are you ready? He asked gently. No clinical tone, no urgent medical checklist. Just her husband, Clara nodded, nervous but ready. My driver will be here in 40 minutes. She had booked a rideshare to the outpatient surgical center. That was one of her boundaries. She wanted to handle the logistics of check-in herself. Ethan would meet her there afterward, not walk her through pre-op. It felt strange, after all the months of fighting, to stick to this arrangement, but she refused to backslide. When the rideshare car pulled up out front, she grabbed her small pre-op bag. Ethan stepped forward, hesitated, then gave her a soft, careful. It was the first real embrace they had shared in weeks. I'll be at the surgical center waiting for you, he said. Whatever you need. No taking over, I promise. Clara squeezed him, then headed out. Time blurred once she arrived at the. Nurses checked her vitals, reviewed consent forms, and walked her into. Her surgeon stopped by to go over final details. Her mind drifted back to the cyst rupture year ago, when every choice had been made for her. Today, every step happened with her full consent. The difference felt. Under anesthesia, hours slipped. Ethan sat in the surgical center's waiting room the whole. Other family members paced, made phone calls, argued. He sat rigid in a plastic chair, scrolling through nothing on. His doctor brain kept racing, running through every possible complication statistic he knew. Every instinct screamed for him to go find the surgical team, to demand updates. But he remembered their dining table. He forced himself still, to wait for staff to. A nurse finally appeared, giving him a short pause. The procedure had gone. Recovery would take hours. He exhaled a long, shaky breath he had not known. When Clara was wheeled out to post-op recovery, groggy and sore, he leaned in, speaking softly. No jargon. You did really well, he told her. You. There was no push to review lab work, no attempt to quiz the nursing staff. He her lead. On the drive home, she rested against the car window. Pain medication. Once inside the house, he helped her onto the living room couch, stacked soft pillows at her back, fetched blanket. For a few peaceful hours, but old patterns lie close beneath the surface. Late afternoon, Clara's pain spiked. She winced, pressing one hand against her abdomen. Ethan's flickered. Before he stopped himself, he began reciting usage options, listing different pain medication combinations from his hospital. Clara slowly. Her jaw tightened, the familiar defensive spark returning. She did not snap, but her firm. Ethan, stop, out again. He was mid-sentence. For a heartbeat, frustration was inside him. He only wanted. Then he remembered their promise. He bit back the rest of his clinical advice, shifted gears. Sorry, he said quietly. How does it feel right now? What do you need from me? That correction mattered. It proved how fragile their progress was. Old habits did not vanish just because he had talked them through. They had to actively care in the moment. Clara told him her prescription pill was enough, that she just needed quiet acts. Ethan fetched those without adding commentary. That evening, Mia showed up at the front door, bringing fresh fruit. Her mother-in-law's hip injury had stabilized enough for her to slip her visit. She looked in their living room, propped up on the couch, Ethan carefully around her, holding space in charge. Mia's eyes widened slightly, seeing them. Later, after Mia left, night fell, rained the windows once more. Ethan sat on the far end of the couch. I opened up this afternoon, he admitted. That instinct of everything is so automatic. I almost didn't catch myself. I noticed, Clara said. But you stopped. That counts. The surgery was over. The crisis had passed. But their real work was only just getting started. The high stress of surgery day had come, and not perfectly succeeded, but they had failed either. Deep unresolved hurts still lingered under the surface. The big final reckoning over their marriage's future could no longer be put off. Weeks of slow recovery unfolded. Clara spent most days resting on the living room couch. Bruising lingered, and fatigue weighed heavy on her body. Small household tasks exhausted her, so Ethan took over grocery shopping, cooking simple meals, and keeping the house running. He stayed mindful of their agreement, but the risk of slipping back lingered in every interaction. Most days went smoothly. He would ask how her pain felt before offering any thoughts. When she had questions about her recovery, he would give general observations, then remind her to follow her surgeon's instructions. He never pressed to look at her post-op notes. Still, there were small stumbles. Twice he caught himself drafting a message to her surgical team and deleted it before hitting send. Each misstep was followed by quiet self-correction and a short apology to Clara. One quiet Sunday afternoon, the rain cleared for the first time in many weeks. Thin golden sunlight streamed through the living room windows. Clara was strong enough to sit upright for longer stretches. Ethan set down the book he had been reading, turned toward her, and brought up the unspoken weight hanging over them. The surgery is over. The physical healing is underway, but we both know our marriage hasn't fully healed, he said softly. We patched things together through the crisis, but we still have all the old hurt to work through. Clara nodded. She had been waiting for this conversation. The urgent pressure of the operation no longer hung over, leaving space for everything they had brushed aside. She shifted on the couch, careful of her tender abdomen. This all started long before I booked that surgery. The cyst rupture, the migraine, every small moment where my voice got pushed to the side. I don't want those wounds to just sit dormant, waiting for the next crisis to wake. Ethan leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. No clinical detachment, no problem-solving rush. I've thought a lot about that ER night 3 years ago, he said. At the time, I thought I was giving you the best possible care. My whole world revolves around stopping bad outcomes. When the person I love is hurting, I jump straight to action. I never stopped to consider that being rescued can also feel like being robbed of your own. paused, picking his words carefully. Being an ER doctor rewires how you ask. I see every worst-case scenario, but I cannot keep treating our marriage like an emergency room. Not every difficulty needs an immediate fix. Sometimes I just need to sit with you in the Clara's amp. I don't need you to never want me. I just need my perspective count equally. When my body is on the line, my judgment gets to come first. Even when I understand that now, Ethan replied. But I also need you to hear my side. When you shut me out completely and make huge life choices with any warning, it leaves me terrified and adrift. I don't get to be your partner if I only find out major events from calendar. That was the balance they had been groping toward for months. Autonomy for her, connection for him. One did not have the other. Clara acknowledged steps. I fell into withdrawal as a mechanism. Instead of telling you I felt overridden, I started keeping secrets. That was my mistake. I should have spoken up in the moment, not let resentment build until I was making big. For as they talked, sitting bathed in that rare Sunday sunlight, they revisited the business trip, the solo wedding, every small incident that had piled up. They did not fight old battles. They named hurts, admitted missteps, and owned their respective damage. There was no magic solution. Old habits had formed over years, and they would not vanish in one afternoon. Ethan would still carry the doctor's reflex. Clara would still have that instinct to shut down mist. But now both of them could. Toward the end of the conversation, Ethan made a proposal. I think we should marriage counseling, not because we are broken beyond repair, but to help us keep practicing new ways of talking, before we slip back into failure. Clara breathed in slow and deep. She had considered therapy before, but in the heat of their fights it had felt like a distant idea. Now it made perfect sense. I agree, she said. We need help to hold each other accountable. A weight lifted both of their shoulders. Real costs remained. Some scars would not fade quickly. Trust had been badly bruised, and rebuild would take consistent work, intentions. This conversation settled the core conflict, yet healing's future. As the sun dipped low outside, Ethan moved on the couch. For the first time since their fight began, they sat touching, pressed gently together, no longer divided by guest room walls and standoffs. The war crisis was behind them, but the long work of rebuilding was only beginning. 2 months drifted past after Clara's surgery. Autumn deepened across the Seattle suburbs. Maple trees blazed burnt orange and gold, and the constant rain softened into crisp, misty mornings. Clara's physical recovery was complete. Her energy returned, and she went back to work full-time, stepping into a new, larger marketing project. The scar faded, quiet and pale against her skin. The physical wound was gone, but the emotional scars from their long conflict still needed gentle tending. Ethan's ER shifts continued to be chaotic and draining. He still came home worn out, carrying the weight of other people's suffering. The doctor reflex never fully vanished. Once in a while, when Clara mentioned a minor ache or a routine checkup, he would catch himself about to launch into a full clinical breakdown. He would pause, reset, and ask how she felt instead. It was small, intentional work, repeated day after day. They kept their weekly marriage counseling appointment. Some sessions felt encouraging, some felt heavy and uncomfortable. The therapist helped them spot their old triggers, Ethan's urge to fix, Clara's instinct to withdraw when she felt unheard. They practiced simple household rules. For major decisions, they promised to bring things up early, not spring finished plans on each other. When one felt overstepped, they would name it right away instead of letting resentment slowly pile. They fell back into sharing their master bedroom again. It did not feel like some perfect fairy tale reset. Some nights they lay awake beside each other, quiet, still processing everything that had happened. There were no grand romantic gestures to erase months of strife. Repair showed up in tiny, ordinary moments. One Wednesday evening, Clara got an official company email. Her manager Diane offered her a week-long industry conference out of state, another business trip. She sat at the kitchen counter reading the travel offer, and for a second, old habits. Part of her wanted to sign the forms immediately, the way she had done months. Instead, she turned to Ethan, who was wiping down dinner plates. I got offered that conference, he said. I'm thinking about it. I wanted to run it by you. Ethan paused the dish towel in his hands. There was no rush to vet hotel, no demand to rearrange his ER schedule to match hers. That sounds like a big opportunity for your career, he said. How do you feel going? I'm excited, but also a little nervous about way. I haven't traveled since everything. We can look over the travel details together if you want. But the final call is yours, Clara said. That difference. He offered partnership, control, She would make the final choice, but she chose. A few weekends later, Mia and Jake came. Mia glanced on their home, noticing the easy, calm rhythm between Clara. No colds, no tense, guarded. Over wine at the table, Mia brought her own wedding, the one Clara had attended alone all. Hard to believe how much has changed, eh? Mia did. Back. The low wedding, the secretness trip, the hidden booking, the explosive night in the... None of those painful months. They had forced cracks open in a marriage that had been slowly drifting. Later that night, after guests left, rain began to tap against the door. Ethan and Clara stood side by side at the sink, cleaning up together. No urgent crack hung over them. No surgery date loomed. No big fight simmering beneath the surface. Just ordinary. Some days I worry we will slip back, Clara said softly. Water. Ethan turned off the faucet, drying his hands. He leaned against her. We probably will stumble sometimes, he said honestly. Old patterns don't disappear completely. But now we know what to look for. Each other sooner. Clara understood. Their marriage not fixed forever. It needed ongoing care. She had kept the autonomy. And she had also learned not to defense. Ethan had learned to separate his physician identity from her husband. They had both paid a price to get here. Weeks of loneliness, hurt words, trust. But they had through it. Outside, rain kept falling. The quiet distance that had grown between them had magically erased, but it no longer ruled their home. They had learned that love was not about taking someone safe. It was about showing up, listening, and respecting that the person beside you was a fully equal adult. There was no perfect end. Just this. Two people. Still love each other better. Day at a time.